So without further delay, we've got a morning filled with the fantastic knowledge being shared by two experts telling us how we can support children's well-being and mental health. So before we get stuck in, let me quickly introduce you our two experts today. We are really privileged to be joined today by Pam McFarlane. Pam was born in Zimbabwe and raised in South Africa, where Pam settled in England in 2002. With over 40 years experience, she has also got the privilege of teaching children between the ages of 2 and 18. She's been running her own successful setting for the last 14 years when she founded her own business called Enrich Coaching, where she's supporting educators to make sure that they have this that they've got that support in place, because she knows that their mental health and well-being is also not always being looked after. Her coaching and passion for training early years educators is really vast, and she's done it across the world, from the Philippines to Ethiopia. Pam is quite an adventurer, and you can see all her memoirs on Amazon that you can buy that. It's quite interesting, even from climbing Mount Snowdon, which I won't take on, and even wrestling, Mongolian wrestling, but that's an entirely different story. We also have our fantastic speaker, Gina Smith. Gina is the founder of Creative Visual Arts. It's a small business on a mission to make visual communication accessible to all. She is a mum of two, plus a former teacher with experience teaching in both mainstream and special schools. If that's not enough, she also is school SEND governor and a tutor for children and adults with learning difficulties. Gina is passionate about enabling communication using visual symbols and has created a whole range of resources that help families, schools, and nurseries support their children in both understanding what is happening and expressing their wants and needs. So without further ado, I'm going to pass you over to the fantastic Pam, who's going to give us talk to us a little bit more about how we can support children's mental health and well-being. Pam, over to you. That's quite a mouthful this morning.
That's fine. Hello, everybody. Am I live? Can you hear me?
We can hear you, yes.
We can hear you. You can hear me. That's fantastic. Right. My good. I can see a whole bunch of you. It's lovely to be with you today. We're going to look really at almost like the bigger picture before Gina gets down to really practical things that you can do to help. We're looking at children's well-being and mental health, and in specifics, we're looking at anxiety. Next slide, please. So to start off with, we need to know, what does anxiety mean? What do we mean when we say, I'm anxious? We look at the causes of anxiety in children, and that's the anxious generation. There's a book out for you. We look at factors we can control, because often we think life's happening to us and we can't control anything, and we can. So we're going to look at factors we can control with regards to anxiety. We can look at ways in which we can build children's resilience, and that includes the importance of play, the importance of risk, and the importance of language. So hopefully by the end of that, we'll have a general idea of what we're looking at and in which way we can make a difference. Thank you. Next slide. So anxiety explained. So anxiety is a normal emotion. We all feel it, and it's a body's natural response to stress. Also, it's important to note it's the anticipation of future threat, what may happen, what could happen, what we imagine is going to happen. That's normal. As you say, I felt a bit anxious early on. I felt anxious coming on to this webinar. That is normal emotion, because we don't know what's going to happen. But severe anxiety is when the anxiety interferes with your normal life activities. And then we can get into anxiety disorder as well. So fear and worries are normal for children. And according to their developmental stage, we see their fears and worries kind of like changing. Excuse me. Anxiety disorders occur when the worry is so high that you can't function. The child can't function. There's very little well-being going on, and the anxiety is out of control. Excuse me a moment. Right, next slide, please. So the normal fears that we see in children Very briefly, we can't go into it too much right now. In infancy, loud noises, heights, loss of physical support. When they're 1 to 2 years, strangers, they're wary sometimes. Toileting activities can cause anxiety. Being injured. Is the little one holding her arm. If you're working with 1 to 2-year-olds, a lot of that tends to happen. 3 to 5 years old, some animals may make children anxious. Monsters, there's lots of stories about monsters, and they can be very real for children. I remember when I was young, a monster lived under my bed, and I would have to check it every single night to see if it was not there, because I thought it was. The dark. Often children are afraid of the dark or just being alone. And those are normal fears that we can allay and we can work with, and the children can work through. Next slide, please. So, how does anxiety show itself in children? You are so well aware of all these things. Tantrums. Some people do not call them tantrums. I know some settings don't call them tantrums. We know what we mean by that. The behavioral outbursts of some way, shape, or form. There's problems with sleep, including nightmares. I used to often have parents saying, oh, they couldn't sleep, they had bad dreams, etc., etc. Friendships, sometimes that, especially when they're a little bit older, that can be shown in friendship circles. Separation from adults. I'm sure you've all had children who you've got a prize from an adult in the morning. Sometimes that is due to anxiety. And also some children in your setting will cling on to one particular staff member because they're too anxious to let them go. And I'm sure you've come across that. Illness, often tummy ache is a big one. But in various forms, anxiety shows itself because sometimes, and most times, they cannot say what they are feeling. Next slide, please. But we're going to put this all into context because this is a thing that is happening in society right now. There is an increased number of anxious children. And it stands to reason that there's an increased number of anxious parents. Now, this book here, The Anxious Generation, is a brilliant one. And it explores this in great depth. Now, it's talking mainly about Gen Z. So we look at 23, 24 years old down to about 15. But the impact affects parents today, it affects us, it affects our staff, it affects our children. Now, just as an aside, anxiety is a massive health issue, a mental health issue within our staff at the moment. And I would love to talk to you more about that. I'm sure we've had many people coming to us and saying, I'm so anxious. Or we interview somebody and they say, oh, I'm fine, but I have anxiety. This is a topic that needs urgent addressing. And we do that. If you are interested in that, we look at staff mental health because it is all part of what we're looking at with children. Thank you. Next slide. Just to give you some brief idea, Jonathan Haidt found that the rise of anxiety, depression, and self-harm is across the Western world. And he relates that to the start of when smartphones were introduced. It is the most phenomenal stats that you've ever seen, and I really encourage you to read it, this book. But you can just see here, it goes up to 2018, but the stats continue. So you can see anxiety and depression, even ADHD, bipolar, and anorexia, rose exponentially within a few short years. Next slide, please. So we look at anxiety and depression in England for ages 11 to 15, and that was a few years ago. So we're looking at our 22, 23-year-olds now. Anxiety in girls, anxiety in boys, depression, all shooting up. Happiness trends in the UK, shooting down. UK teens, self-harm. This is 13 to 16. Again, we're looking at our young adults now. Girls and boys just shooting off the scale. So this is a society in which we live. And the next slide, please, shows a little bit of that. It's called, he calls it the phone generation effect. And we can look at ourselves, we can look at our staff, we can look at our parents, and we can look at our children. So this phone generation effect, where everything is instant, you get all your validation from the phone, everything is through social media, etc., etc. All this impacts socialization skills, and I'm sure we've seen this in our children. Attention, listening, engaging, reading emotions, developing relationships. It is not where it used to be. It's not where it should be. Attention spans are getting shorter and shorter. You know, just to, I'm sure you can see it in yourselves, never mind. I know I scroll through TikTok and it's, you know, an hour and a half can pass by and my goodness, you know, my attention span has been 3 seconds long on some things and maybe a minute on others. Speech and language, we've seen this with our children because they're poor role models, poor eye contact, less facial learning. Parents on screens a lot more, they don't see how to communicate. And we're seeing this impact with children. That will impact anxiety, by the way, big time, because you cannot express what you're feeling. Validation. Our validation these days, for many, many people, comes through the screen. We're validated, we get likes, we get people agreeing with us online. We put things out on our Facebook, etc. That shows my age, but on the Insta, we put our things out, and we make sure that it is perfectly, you know, edited, so we don't look like we really look. Yeah, all of this is passed down to children, and it leads to increased anxiety. Thank you. Next slide, please. So besides all of that, there are some risk factors for developing anxiety disorders. So one is genetics or temperament. They can have a more anxious parent, more anxious sort of family situation. There's a history of mental health difficulties in the family. And we don't know about these things very much when we have our children in nursery. But sometimes you do. You will be told about some sort of mental health issue with a parent, and that may be passed down. Being exposed to adversity. So when parents separate, huge anxiety ensues. We've all seen it. Ill health or bereavement, if they lose a parent, if they lose a loved one, even if they lose a pet, there's that sense of loss creates a great deal of anxiety. What's going to happen next? If I wake up tomorrow, will that person still be there? And also obviously more traumatic experiences such as big accidents or child abuse. Now I'm sure we've all seen levels of all of those things in our nursery. That adds to the anxiety, and it can become a more raised level of anxiety. And then here's a big one for me: parents or caregivers' own anxiety. They, you know, children look at our behavior, and if they're modeled anxious behavior, they will pick it up. And I've come across many parents, as I'm sure you have, who talk about their fears, talk about their anxieties, about their children in front of you, in front of them. And some parents these days are very, very anxious for various reasons. And children pick up on that. They also pick up on our staff. If our staff are anxious, they will pick it up. So that's why working with your staff is vital to creating that space to help children's anxiety within nursery. Next slide, please. So what factors can we help control? Genetics, temperament, that the one we spoke about now. The only way around this really is to know the parents and to know the child. And I know we We do that. But maybe do it a little bit extra level in knowing the parents, a little bit of a quiet chat here and there. Good questions really help. Find out where they're at. See if there's any changes in behavior with parents as well. And say, is everything okay? Because if they're anxious, it's being passed down to their children, and maybe we can have some input into that. Obviously, knowing the child, are there any changes in behavior? Are there things that just don't sit right with you? You will know if they're hitting an anxiety patch. And then the one about being exposed to adversity, safeguarding. We've all got safeguarding policies and procedures. That's one thing that we can control, is to prevent and to notice things that are going on. We can also be a really safe place for children. And that means staff are not anxious themselves, and they are reassuring children that they are safe. We can build trust with children. Sometimes that takes a bit longer with certain children, especially if they've been hurt. But building the trust will help lower their anxiety because they've got somebody there. And listening. Listening is a big one. We can listen to their words, but also their actions, their body language, and their behaviors. And we can step in. So parents or caregivers own anxiety. It's building a relationship with those parents, really looking, and not a friendship, but it's like a working relationship where you can see if they're down and if there's anything that is being passed on to the child and how you could help. And if they're fearful about nursery, obviously do what you do and say, it's going to be okay. Come in, sit with them for a little bit, come in and see it's all okay. Be positive. And ensure for them that they know that it's a safe place as well. It's a safe place for them, and it's a safe place for their children. Thank you. Next slide, please. So one of the things we can do is look at the importance of play. Many good webinars, articles, research, whatever, about the importance of play. And very simply, it wires up the brain so children can learn about the world and themselves. But what's happened is that play has become much more regimented. And what we do is we have so many rules that play becomes very adult directed. So, I'd highly recommend set up play that is open to interpretation. I know we talk about loose parts. It's more than that. Set up things that encourage imagination, problem solving, risk assessing. Stand aside and watch. Sometimes we get in there a little bit too much. Allow non-directive play. Let them develop the play. If we carry on, hover parenting in a sense, play becomes less free and less beneficial. I remember back in the day when I first started in early years in this country, one of the things we had to do with children is to encourage problem solving. That was taken off the EYFS, but there was a whole section on problem solving. And for me, that was my favorite one because it enabled children to play and problem solve and get your solution without the adult telling them how it should be done. Next slide, please. So we build resilience through free play. So just for this little flow chart, less adult input in their play, child learns how to handle risk. They will, and we'll go to this a bit later, they will learn what is risky and what's the best way to handle this. It gives them confidence to face new situations. They'll remember. And ultimately, what it does is it inoculates against anxiety. So it's so important. We're looking at the long term now. It's not an instant thing, but we want them to find their own solutions. We want them to be confident and to push that anxiety aside. Next one, please. So the importance of risk is that obviously we've got to create opportunities for safe risk. And we can do that with our planning and in our settings, but we stand back and we watch. We allow opportunities to problem solve. We give time for children to figure it out. Sometimes we rush children so much in their play, and we've got such strict, time limits. We need to breathe as much as possible. Give time for children to figure it out, and reassure them, encourage them to try again, and praise achievement. You did it. You all know this. It's just really an encouragement for you to do this more. Next slide, please. So children operate in a discover and a defend mode. The discover mode is where they shoot out into the outside area. They're screaming and shouting, they're laughing, and they go towards something, and they are learning. They're saying, let me grow, and they out there and they're doing it. It's like when you release children into a park, same sort of thing. It's a discover, grow. What's happening? Let me grow. But then children who are anxious, and even those who don't at times, will get into defend mode. And then this is where they scan for danger. They see new situations as more dangerous than exciting. They see the potential threats rather than the opportunities. And you can see an anxious child doing those very things. And what he's saying is, keep me safe. So what we need to do is encourage the discover mode and reassure during the defend mode. The child will come back to you as a secure base and go out again and come back and then go out again. And we really need to look at the discover mode, defend mode. Look at your children. Who's shouting, let me grow, and who's shouting, keep me safe? And I love this little step diagram. I use it often, and we can attach this to ourselves or to our children. I won't do it. I can't do it. I want to do it. How do I do it? I'll try to do it. I can do it. I will do it. Yes, I did it. And at the top level, anxiety is very low. At the bottom level, anxiety is very, very high. Next slide, please. Again, I'm speaking to the converted. Free play ideas. Really, I would encourage you to get lots of real things in. We're so reliant on plastic and even wooden objects, but get real things in. Fruit, vegetables, baking ingredients, wood and tools, baby clothes for washing, fabrics, all of these things, musical instruments, cameras, magnifying glasses, mirrors, just real things so that they can just open their minds to possibilities. And one of my big things is using stories as a basis for play. Actually, you can use stories as a basis for your entire planning. It's the most exciting thing to do. And have props available. Story is such an important part of looking at anxiety and any other feelings that we cope with. And it's a way children can work it out. You talk about your fears, you acknowledge emotions. Story is key to a lot of these things, and they can use stories as a basis for free play. Thank you. Next one. The importance of language. Be careful what we say, because if we are anxious, we will say anxious things. Coaching approach. Now, I don't have time to go into it. We focus on coaching approaches and developing a coaching style with our company. We use this with adults to achieve goals. With coaching, you achieve goals. And it's people do that through their own resources. So we can do it with children too. Our language. What is making you scared? Break it down. What don't you like about the story? Tell me more. That jump looks high. How can I help you? Do you think you could do this? Could you use that as a step? So use your language very carefully in building them up, getting them out of that defend mode. And then depending on age and language skills, use signs, symbols, images, and words, and Gina is a marvel at that. So we can learn all about that. But remember language. It's so important. Thank you. Just we can go into this later if you like. I don't want to encroach on Gina's time. We do have a coaching approach and a coaching course that will help you with staff and children. Our next one is on the 20th of June. We'll put it all in the chat, and it will revolutionize your practice, your staff, and your children. That I promise. But anyway, thank you so much for listening. I'm open for any communications after the whole webinar as well. And obviously any questions that you may have during the webinar. Thank you for listening. And
Thank you, Pam. Thank you so much. So there will be a Q&A session at the end. So if you've got any questions you want to ask Pam, or Gina's going to be next, by all means do put it in the chat and we can ask that to all the speakers afterwards. Gina, have you managed to unmute yourself?
Can you hear me?
We can hear you. Fantastic.
Amazing. Amazing.
Yes. Excellent. Okay,
Fantastic.
Brilliant. We will just share your slides now.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
First of all, thank you to Pam. I sat here nodding the whole way through. Pam and I met online last week, and we are so aligned in what we think and feel about all of this. And so I was just sitting there nodding. Thank you, Pam. And just to say that I actually, having met Pam last week, I bought the book, The Anxious Generation, on Audible, and I've been listening to it. It's brilliant. It's scary, the world that we're raising children in. But it is a brilliant read, so I also recommend it, although I'm only part way in. So yes, my name is Gina, and I'm here. I'm going to talk to you about reducing anxiety in children and practical ways that you can do that within your early years setting. Adele gave me a lovely introduction at the beginning, so I don't really need to introduce myself again. My main role is I'm mum to two girls who are 11 and 9. I've been a teacher. I've supported teenagers with severe autism. I've worked with children with special needs in a lot of different ways, and now I run Create Visual Aids, and I have developed a range of visual symbols that help people communicate. Next slide, please. Okay, so I'm not going to spend too long talking about the causes of anxiety in children because Pam has covered that for us. You can see a few different things here. A traumatic event could be a death of a loved one, something like that. An unsettled home life could be perhaps a child has moved house a lot, perhaps parents are arguing a lot, a child could have been injured, they could be subject to bullying, they could be subject to abuse. What I'm going to talk about a lot today is children feeling life is out of control. And that doesn't have to be down to any of the reasons I've listed above. You could have a child who hasn't had any of those things above happen, but they just really feel that life is out of control. And that makes them feel frustrated, worried. When we are frustrated, worried, angry, our behaviour changes. Now, if you can, I'm sure you already know this, I hope you already know this, but if you take one thing away from my talk today, it would be my next slide, please, which is that all behaviour is communication. All behaviour. So even the child that comes into your setting and is very chatty, is very confident, is able to go off and play by themselves, they're kind to others, that child is communicating to you that they are happy and confident, they're feeling very, very settled. You could have a child who is, some children call it, some adults might call it a tantrum. We would probably say they're dysregulated. You might have a child who's just really, really upset. They might not show that at your setting. They might show that at home. But they're communicating to you that something's wrong. The child that's really, really shy, doesn't want to speak. It's all communication. I think one of the best things we can do as early years practitioners is to educate parents who might not already know that if their child is resisting getting ready in the morning, if they're getting really upset and worked up, it's letting them know that it's communication. They're communicating something to you. They're not being naughty, which is what some people might think they are, but they're not. They're not being naughty. They are communicating. So what I'd like to do is give you a scenario. I'd like you to imagine that you have been taken out in a car and you're not told where you're going. You've not been told who you're going to see, when you're going to get there, when or if you're going to get fed, and when or if you're going to come home. How would that feel? I would hate that. I would hate that lack of control. I like to feel in control. I'm sure we all do, because it's scary and we don't know what's happening in our day. Children feel the same. And as adults, it's very easy to take children from pillars to posts, especially when a child comes from a very, very busy household. Perhaps there's other siblings. Children are taken about they don't know what's happening. I know that in our family, my husband and I have been guilty of making a decision on a Friday evening of, oh, let's do this tomorrow. And then we've said to our girls in the morning, we're going to leave in half an hour. And they've said, where are we going? And we haven't actually had the conversation in front of them, not intentionally. We forgot to tell them because they weren't in the room when we discussed it. The children don't know. It leaves them feeling anxious because they haven't got that control of what's happening in their day. I'm sure that many of you have seen the child who insists they have the blue cup, not the red cup. They're trying to gain back some control because when they've been taken to nursery, it wasn't their choice. They might love nursery, but they haven't had any say over it, whether they love nursery or not. They are feeling that life is out of control and they are trying to gain back some control. Next slide, please. So an anxious child needs to know what is going to happen in their day. They need to know key events, such as when they're going to eat, and really, really importantly, they need to know when they're going to go home again. This is so important for children with separation anxiety. Pam talked about a child thinking to themselves, will my parent come back if they leave? I always try to say to parents, when you're separating from your child, don't sneak off. Because if you sneak off once and when they're not looking, you could do that at any time. What that leaves the child feeling is, well, my parents disappeared on me once, they might disappear at any point. I never know when they're going to go, and that's going to increase their anxiety. What you can do instead, if you can show the child, yes, I'm going, but yes, this is when I'm coming back, or when you drop your child at nursery, if the child can see, this is when I'm going to go home again, this is when I'm going to see my main carer, then they can relax and enjoy their day. So like I said in the slide, knowing what's happening allows a child to feel calm because there's no big scary surprises. I know surprises are supposed to be good, but not all children see it that way. Not all adults see it that way. They're able to feel a sense of control. If they know what's happening in their day, they can also begin to have some independence because they can prepare themselves both emotionally and physically for what's coming up next. This boosts their self-esteem. So how do we help children to know what is happening in their day? Next slide, please. All right, we need to communicate. We need to communicate to children what is happening, and we need to find a way to communicate that works for young children, because for very, very young children, or for children with additional needs, they might find it too hard to process spoken language. If you give them a list of what's happening in their day using just words, then there's two things that have got to happen. A, they've got to process what it is you've said, and B, they've got to remember what it is you said. Now, that's a really big ask of a very, very young child, of a child with additional needs. So we need to find a way to communicate with them that works for young children. Next slide, please. Okay, so there is something called AAC, which stands for Augmentative and Alternative Communication. And what that is, it's finding a different way of communicating other than speech. And here's just a few examples. There's Makaton signing or sign along, British Sign Language, verbal prompts, gentle physical prompts, braille, facial expressions, or using pictures or visual symbols. Next slide, please. Thank you. Okay, so pictures make a great way of communicating for young children for quite a few reasons. The main reason is that pictures don't disappear. So if I say to you, get dressed, then a young child is left trying to process that information, and they've got to remember it, because as soon as you say the words have gone, they've disappeared. With a picture, you can show the picture that says get dressed and it doesn't go anywhere, it stays there. And the child can keep looking at it, and if they forget what it was that they've been told, then they can look back again. So it's a great way of communicating and supporting spoken language. Pictures communicate routine and transitions, again, allowing a child to know what's happening. They also have no tone of voice. Now, if I say to you, get dressed, a child is trying to process what you've said. And then if you say it again in a different tone of voice and say, get dressed, what a lot of children do is they hear that as a different instruction, even though it's the same words, you've used a different tone of voice. So what happens is they were trying to process the first instruction, Then they've heard a second instruction. Now they need to start again. They go back to the beginning and start processing that one. If you keep giving them spoken instructions, it layers and layers and layers, and they become overwhelmed. It's too much information. Visuals, sorry, have no tone of voice. I just said that. They are universal across all languages, so they are a great way of communicating to a child with English as additional language. They can be transferred between environments, which means that you could have a child using the same pictures at home as in your setting, and they can bring them back and forth. And like I explained earlier, they promote independence because a child can see what's happening and they can get prepared for that. Now, when I say pictures, you could be using photos to communicate to a child what's happening in their day, and photos are great. The problem with photos is that they're very, very specific. If you have a child with autism, they might look at a photo and go, well, that applies to that set of Play-Doh, but not that set of Play-Doh, because they look different. So with photos, just see how a child gets on. So for some children, they work brilliantly. For other children, they're not generic enough. If you're going to use visual symbols, use ones that are generic. You can see in these pictures here, we have little people that are age neutral, skin color neutral, and gender neutral, so that they can represent anyone. We try and make visual symbols as generic as possible. Okay, next slide, please. So here are a few ways of using visual symbols in your setting to support children with anxiety. So like I said, Pam's given us a big overview, and this is some really specific ways that you could use visuals in your setting to support a child who is anxious. Next slide, please. Okay, so a visual timetable is a list of pictures or visual symbols that shows a child what's coming up in their day. This is a great way of supporting a child with separation anxiety because they can see what's coming up in their day. They can see when it's lunchtime. Then they can see that after our circle time this afternoon, I'm going home. I get to see my main carer again. This means that they can now relax and enjoy their day. It's not going to be an easy fix if you've got a child who has really severe anxiety, but it is going to help them feel that sense of control and relieve their anxiety a little, because they can see what's coming up and you're taking away the surprises. Next slide, please. Okay, if you have a child who finds the information on a visual timetable too much information, it might be that looking at all those pictures one after the other, it's too much to take in, then you could use a now and next board, and it just shows the next two things coming up in the day. Or in the other photo here, you can see a child using a now, next and then board, and what that's doing is it's showing the next three things coming up in their day. Now this is really good for a child who struggles to transition from one activity to another. I would combine this with a sun timer, and I would say now it's Play-Doh, and when the sun runs out, they'll be able to see next it's singing, or whatever it might be next. The other great thing about this is that this is something that the child could carry around the setting with them. So this would be really good to support a child one-to-one. What this wouldn't work so well for would be for a generic set of visuals for supporting all the children in your group. Next, please. Okay, again, you could have a key ring of symbols. So this is a great way of taking visuals out and about with you, and you can just show a child the symbol to show them what's happening next, or it could be photos, whatever it is that you need to communicate. If you've got them on a key ring, or you can have them on a lanyard around your neck or attached to your jacket, whatever it is, then you've always got visuals with you, because you never know when you're going to need to communicate, and you're not just going to need to communicate when you are next to the visual timetable in your setting. So this is a way that you can always have the tool ready to support a child who's feeling particularly anxious about what's coming up. Next, please. Now, having signs around your setting, I'm sure you all do this already. It's promoting independence because a child can see where everything is and they don't have to ask. Again, what we can do is then boost their self-esteem because they are feeling more independent. Next, please. Now, Pam talked a lot about building resilience through play. Pam, I absolutely loved your image with the steps, showing a child from I want to do it, I can't do it, sorry, I can't do it, and then I want to do it. If you've got a child who's very anxious to go off into the nursery and either tell you what it is they want to do, or take you, or go and get involved in an activity by themselves during their choosing time, then what this does, this choosing board kind of creates a mid-step. So rather than having to have the confidence to speak, which if the child's feeling particularly anxious and they haven't got the confidence to speak, what they can do is they can point, or these cards here you can pull off and hand to somebody. They can have a look and see what their options are, so that they're not having to wander off into the nursery and play by themselves yet. Yes, that's what we want them to do. We want them to have the confidence to go off and play by themselves. But if they're not there yet, this is a way that perhaps they could point and communicate to you without having to find the words if they haven't got that ability yet, or if they're too anxious to speak yet. It's a mid-step. Next, please. Excuse me, I must have some water. Okay. Now, just a bit of theory behind communication here. There are two main types of communication. There is receptive communication, where somebody's receiving information, and the resources that I've just shown you now, I was showing you just then, were very much about receptive communication. We were communicating to a child, this is what's happening, this is what's happening in your day. Expressive communication is about giving a child a voice, giving anybody a voice. It doesn't just have to be children. It's the ability to communicate with others. Now, if you've got a child that is non-verbal, or is struggling with their language, or perhaps they're not speaking because they're very, very anxious, if they can't communicate their feelings, their wants and their needs, then they're going to start feeling very frustrated. And as I explained earlier, when we are frustrated, our behaviour changes. And I'm sure many of you have seen a child who's very frustrated because they can't communicate. So we also need to find a way to give children a voice. And again, we can do that using alternative methods of communication. Next slide, please. So, sorry, and on to the next one. Sorry, next slide again, please. Thank you. So what you could have is a... That's it, thank you. So what you could have is, no, it's fine, it's my fault. You could have a communication board. The main picture here is one in the park, but the smaller one, this is just an A3 board. And this is just a board with lots of pictures that you could put on the wall that will allow a child to point to their pictures to explain what it is they want to say. What you're doing is you are giving them another way of expressing themselves and communicating what it is that they want or need. Because as I said, if they can't do that, they're going to be feeling even more anxious if they don't know that they're going to be able to tell you that they need the toilet. So with this, they can point to the visual symbol that they need to communicate. Next, please. With a feelings chart, it's really, really important. I'm sure I don't need to tell you this, that a child can communicate how they are feeling. So with a chart like this, they can take the symbols off, they can pass it to you, or they can move it to the top of the chart to communicate how they are feeling, because once they can tell you how they're feeling, then you can understand what's going on and you can support them. Next, please. And finally, a way of helping children to communicate is just by having the visual symbols a way around for children to be able to communicate with you. You might have them on the wall, you might have them in a book, so they can take a picture and hand it to you. I'm sure many of you may have heard of PECS and PECS cards. PECS stands for Picture Exchange Communication System, and it is just that. It's a system that teaches non-verbal children to communicate through pictures. If you are going to use PECS, it would probably be under the advice of a speech and language therapist, and if they recommend that, I highly recommend you go on the PECS course. A PECS book is a folder where you carry around lots of pictures. But it might be that the child doesn't need the whole PECS system. It just help them to have the visual symbols available so that they can communicate to you how it is that they are feeling. Okay, and next slide, please. And finally, pictures support emotional development. If we've got an anxious child in our setting, we need to help their emotional development. I'm sure you know this. there are lots and lots of books out there that support children with their emotional understanding. Children need to be able to recognise feelings in others before they can recognise them themselves, before they can begin to manage their big feelings. So what you could do is you could have a set of picture cards or a feelings chart on the wall, or a keyring and feeling symbols, and get children to watch their favourite television programme or look in a book, and you can ask questions. How's that person feeling? How's Bluey feeling when that happened to Bingo, and all that sort of thing. Get them to copy different facial expressions. Can they make those facial expressions? What we're doing is we're helping children to recognise different emotions, so that in turn they can then recognise emotions in themselves and communicate to you how it is they're feeling. Because if they are feeling really, really anxious and worried, ideally we want them to be able to tell you. Okay, so just move to the last slide. What I'd like you to do today, if you get a chance when you go back to your setting, is just have a look around and think, how are we supporting communication in this setting? Do we have another way of A, communicating to a child what's happening, and B, giving a child the opportunity to communicate to me if they can't use words? So it might be visual symbols, it might be pictures, it might be signing. Do you have another alternative way of communicating within your setting for those children for whom spoken language is not the easiest way for them to communicate yet? Okay, next one, please. Thank you for watching. And just the last slide, just to say, this is my website. You can scan here, or you can contact me at hello@createvisualaids.com. The resources that you've seen in the last few slides are available at createvisualaids.com. And if you use the discount code Parenta20, that will give you 20% off until the end of July. It's 20% all of us off our standard resources, unfortunately not our personalized ones because of the time it takes to make them. But like I said, you can use the ones that we've got, but you can use pictures, you can use different resources. You don't have to use mine. Just please support communication because it is so important. And do reach out to me if you've got any questions after today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gina. That was great. I've made so many notes just to kind of more ideas we can support settings and create more resources, but that's fantastic. Thank you so much. And thank you again, Pam. So we've got quite a few questions. If everybody's happy, I'm going to jump into some questions. I'll start with the ones we've had on the group itself. I'm sorry if I pronounced these names wrong, so bear with me. Flutura has said, it increases the anxiety on children with monsters. Why do we have so many books about monsters at schools? I don't know who wants to answer that, Pam or Gina, but that's quite a good question. I love it.
Yeah, I'll go for it if that's okay, Gina.
Go for it.
Yeah. It's really interesting because oral tradition from time immemorial has monsters, has scary things. And oral tradition is all about reflecting the culture, reflecting society, reflecting the world people live in, and learning how to deal with it. And that is passed on through generations. We look at grim fairy tales, Disney, and books, and there's always a baddie, there's always a monster. There's always somebody that makes you really scared. And children, when they go and see movies, often scream because it really can be frightening. And what we do with that sort of thing is we the monsters, and if they're in a book we're reading with the child, we can talk about what makes you scared. Why do you find that monster scary? And talk about fears, open up that, because everybody's got natural kind of fears that we've got to deal with. And it's a great way of using that, of using story. And in all these things, in all the tales, in all the Disney, the monsters don't win. The monsters don't win. And often there's a good side to a monster, and they can see that people can change. So there's many stories that we can use to build up the concept of feeling safe, of feeling that they can face their fears, face their anxieties. And we can use it as a tool for conversation. Does that answer a little bit?
Yeah, hopefully.
Yeah.
Not if that was your question. Brilliant. Okay.
I just like to say that, can I say that was a great question, because as a mum, it used to frustrate me that there were so many books that talked about being scared of the dark, because I didn't want to suggest that to my children. But once they did hit a stage where one of them was afraid of the dark, it was great because I could then go to the stories. But I share your frustration. It is it's again the balance right, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Definitely.
Mm-hmm.
So we also have a question for well, one person's actually said that actually is it better to use real life pictures for younger children than animated images? Gina, do you want to answer that one?
Well, personally, I think it's better to use visual symbols, because the trouble with photos is that they are too specific, particularly for children with autism. So you might have a child who says, that's not my potty because that potty's blue. Okay, that was a bad example, because actually we have to give a colour with the images as well. But the pictures are very, very specific, so they don't transfer so well between home and your setting and wherever you go. When we've developed our visual symbols, we've tried really hard to make them as generic as possible. For example, I try not to put clocks in the background, because a child might go, well, that's not the time, and therefore it's not relevant to me. Again, like I said earlier, we use pictures of people that are skin color neutral, age neutral, gender neutral, because you're trying to be as generic as you can so that they apply to every different scenario. Having said that, I do work with a few people in visual communication who have children with autism who say actually they respond better to photos. So sorry to not give a definite answer there. I'd say visual symbols would be best. But having said that, if it's a photo of, if you're using it for signs in your setting, photos would be brilliant. If you're using it if you're using visuals for communicating when out and about, I'd stick to symbols because they're more generic.
Brilliant. I think it's about individualizing it, isn't it, for whatever the child's needs are. So that's really good. Thank you. Flachara's also asked, what is the difference again between the choosing board and the communication board?
So the communication board, we can make any of these resources. You can make the resources whatever is right for you. I've actually got the communication board here, but with the communication board, basically, it's got some very it's got words such as I, you, I like, I don't like. It's giving children general communication words. This particular one's got feelings on it as well. So it's allowing a child to have expressive communication and say, I like, I don't like, I want to share, I want to stop, I want to wait. You can use it with both expressive and communication, so and receptive, so they can communicate to you and you can communicate to them. The choosing board is specifically about what play options are available.
Brilliant.
Does that make sense? So with the communication board, the child is able to express their feelings, express their likes, their don't likes. The choosing board is specifically for, this is what's available to play. Having said that, you can make them however you want, whatever works for your setting.
Yeah, brilliant. Pam, just one for you. How can practitioners balance the demands of early years education with the needs to focus on mental health, on their well-being as well? Because it's so, we always focus on the child, but actually if us as practitioners aren't in that right space, because it's overwhelming, like you said earlier, it's ever-changing MYFS curriculum. There's so many changes that we have to try, and I think that's also why you see a lot of adult-based because you have to try and fit so many things in. So when you're building your activity, there's so much involvement of an adult. And I know what you said earlier about letting the child kind of develop themselves. But have you got any? There was a big mouthful of questions on that one sentence. Have you got any suggestions on that?
Oh yes, there's an answer in one sentence. This mental health issue is a massive one. Married with that is the number of neurodiverse colleagues we have. Some of us are neurodiverse, so we and different personalities, and we work with this little group of people day in and day out. So we are all impacted by one another. Mental health, I've just written an article for Parenta, actually, which will come up next month, which touches on this. We need to look at our staff afresh and ourselves. if there is anxiety, if there's mental health issues like depression, etc., we can't solve it. We are not therapists, we're not counselors. So we need to know then how to manage it in our roles. And managing that requires knowledge. Find out about mental health. What does it mean to be depressed? What does it mean to have anxiety? What do these things really look like? What's it all about? We need to have that knowledge ourselves as leaders. And then we need to give signposting within our settings. That's a massive one. And I don't mean just some pamphlets next to the manager's desk. If some people are depressed or whatever, and they need some sort of knowledge of where to go, they're not necessarily going to come and tell you. They also don't want you to see them picking a pamphlet out for depression or unplanned pregnancy or money worries. Nobody needs to see that, whatever's causing them the mental health issue. So have a space where they can get physical information, pamphlets, etc., where it is private, so nobody can see what they're taking. Also have all of that information available online for them so that they can access different routes. And then dealing with mental health issues, we've got to be so careful because there's also a capability issue here, which I touch on in the article, and it's that if people are in such a space that they are putting people in danger, that children are not being cared for, then it's a real problem. We really need to look at that and, put our managers' hats on and our coaching hats and say, okay, what do we do with this? Where are we going to go? Where are we going to start? Because it's vital that everybody is safe, including that person. Yeah. Further than that, it's about coaching them through it. It's about coaching them through it, which means that you're empowering them. They find their own resources within themselves. You have goals that they've got to work with, which will lessen their anxiety. So if they're finding it one section of the day too much because of their issues, look at that section of the day. What could they do? What is one thing they could do? What is one thing they could stop doing? Break it down. If they say they're anxious, often I have people coming to me and saying, oh, I'm so anxious, I'm full of anxiety, or I have anxiety. Okay, the language we use then is, okay, what do you mean by anxiety for you? What does it look like for you? Can you share what is happening? If you can't, how are you feeling that anxiety? What can I do to help? What can you do? What is one thing we could do to lessen that? So you unpick as much as you can without going down the counselling route. You make short goals that they can achieve, and you keep short accounts. So you check up. You use your discussion times and your appraisals and supervisions very judiciously so that they have their goals and they need to stick to them. If they can't, then you've got to look at other options. This is such a huge topic. To say anything in a few sentences is
No.
It's
and I did combine, I think, at least 3 questions into one sentence there.
Yeah.
Gina, just quickly, did you want to add anything to that? Because I'm just aware, I know that we're all very busy in practitioners, specifically this time of the day. We start getting a lot of people leave because they have to go and attend the kids.
I think Pam covered it. I think it's education and letting people becoming more aware of mental health. But I think Pam's nailed that one.
Brilliant. Okay. Guys, just I wanted to say a massive thank you to Pam and to Gina for joining us today, and obviously everybody else who's given up their time to attend this webinar. And also, I don't know if everybody is already on our subscriber list. This month, we partnered with Joe Wicks, the body coach, which we're very proud of. And there's actually bespoke menus created for Parenta, which we can share with all the practitioners that you can use in your setting. Really, really good ones. Easy to follow, easy to implement within your setting. So please do download the magazine, which is parenta.com/magazine. Subscribe to that magazine. You'll get a free copy, 40-page, into your inbox every single month. So please do that. And then also lastly, do join us next month on the 10th of July. Next month, we're discussing transition from nursery to school and how we can support those young kids in our school, in our settings, to go to the big boy and big girl school. So yes, do join us next month. But thanks again for all your time. Don't forget to claim your free CPD certificate, and you'll be able to get that as instructions on the email that will come out to you with this recording. Thanks so much, everybody. Have a fantastic day. Have a good day. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.